guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is a very special video. It's all around the eyeshadow palettes. Now today, I randomly selected a few palettes from my collection and I would just guess if it was today that these palettes would have launched, would I repurchase it or not? That would exactly tell me what color story am I into right now and what formulas am I into right now. So if you guys want to see, would I repurchase all these palettes in my collection? If you want to guess, do leave it down in the comment section below. Today, I have 11 palettes from my collection. So let's see if I'm going to repurchase this or not. In no particular order, I first grabbed the Blueberry Muffin palette from BH Cosmetics. I am not a big blue person, but if I had to have one blue palette from my entire collection, I would choose this. Like any day, anytime, I would say. I really kept on thinking whether I do need this palette in my collection or not. But I personally feel this is an amazing quality. Now I know BH Cosmetics is going out of business and it's taken over by Revolution. Makeup Revolution. So I don't know whether you would find this palette or is it sold out. If it is not sold out, everything on BH Cosmetics website is on sale. I would say grab it before it's gone. And if I had to suggest one palette from their entire collection, I would say this. Like I absolutely love it. Even though I'm not a blue person, I love it. The shimmers are absolutely spectacular. These shades, it's more purple leaning than blue leaning, and that's my favorite part. Like I love to wear purpley blues rather than like bluey blues, if that makes sense. But it also does have like neutral tones for an everyday look. I love it. I can do like an everyday look by using this and this for the mattes and use any of these shimmers for like my shimmer lid shade. It's beautiful, it's spectacular. I don't know if you guys can see it or not because of that holographic background, but this is truly a spectacular palette, mostly cool tone leaning. But if I had to get this today, would I? Absolutely. So that is a yes for me. A no for me would be Urban Decay's Born to Run palette. Now, do I like this palette? I absolutely do. Would I take this palette now for travel? Because this was my travel palette back in the days. I don't think so. And it's only because I love the shades. I feel now the quality of other palettes is like so par excellence that this doesn't stand close to it. I would say this is like a duochrome shade. Doesn't perform that well. This Accelerate shade is absolutely spectacular. So there's very inconsistency inside this palette too. This deep maroon shade doesn't go that much deep. This shimmer shade is an absolute dud from this palette. The shades that I absolutely love from this palette is this Still Shot, Stranded, Accelerate, Double Life, Smog, Wanderlust, and Punk. Those are the shades that I absolutely love. But for those shades, would I buy this palette? Especially a high-end palette, I would rather go for an indie palette at this point of time, I would say. So for this time, I would say no to this palette. I'm actually not amazed by Urban Decay's formula altogether for the eyeshadow palettes, and they are not even coming out with a unique color story. This was, I would say, the uniquest color story that they had launched in that time. But at this point, if I see the Urban Decay's website, nothing, absolutely nothing excites me. So for that reason, I'm going to say no. From now onwards, it's like I would say no to a palette and I would say yes instead to another palette which has the same color story. So let's keep on going. Anastasia's Subculture palette. Now, I personally, when this was launched, I was head over heels with this color story. And now people are going with this color story all over again. If Anastasia would have released this right now, instead of that time with their original formula, I would any day buy this palette. Like I would any day buy this palette. But I don't know, maybe because this is an older palette, it doesn't perform well as the other Anastasia palette that are in my collection. And you know, I am a big Anastasia fan. Like I probably have everything from Anastasia. My favorite out of the lot would be Jackie Aina palette, the Sultry palette. I would say those are like my top favorites. This is a beautiful color story, but if you keep this against this palette, which is from Colourpop, which is from Raw Beauty and At Forest Side collaboration. If you put these two palettes right next to each other, is it absolutely exact? No. Is it similar enough? I would say yes. And which one would I choose? I would say Raw Beauty Christie collaboration. One, it is cheaper. Mattes are super blendable, super blendable. Anything I would change in this palette is I would add a little more shimmers, and that's only because I am more of a shimmer person. And I personally do not use those like yellow golds on my eyes, but is that beautiful? Absolutely yes. I would replace this evergreen shade also with this duochrome shade, which is called Electric, and I would definitely add this Roxy shade in this palette. I absolutely love the quality of this. I love the price of this. So would I repurchase this or this? I would say yes to this and no to this. But love the color story. Okay, similarly, I would say Anastasia is a modern Renaissance palette. Now this, again, nothing wrong with this palette at all. I know this was like rage all over the internet, but right now, at this point of time, would I purchase these color story? I don't know. If I'm going for a burgundy palette right now in my collection, I basically am using this palette, and this is Sigma's Warm Neutrals palette. Not that I'm big on burgundy tones right now in this point of time, but if I had to choose one over the other, I would say I would go for Sigma's Warm Neutrals over Anastasia's Modern Renaissance palette, only because this is like more burgundy and like, you know, maroon leaning and brown leaning rather than more on the orangey pink leaning. So I would say this flatters my skin tone much better than this. So I would say yes to Sigma and no to Anastasia right now for these two palettes. And this yes or no is only based on like my liking. Like I have nothing against these brands at all. I love Anastasia, I love Sigma. These are all like my top palettes and brands from my collection. So there's nothing wrong with these brands. But at this point of time, which color story and which formula would I prefer? That's how I'm basing this video out. Now, talking about that, this is gonna be a shocker. I know. But if you've been watching this channel, you also know how much I love my Pat McGrath Eye Shadows. And this, I had been like waiting to grab my hands on this. And this is the Bronze Seduction palette from Pat McGrath, $125 palette. All this, is it anything unique? I don't think so. If you take these 4 shades out of the palette doesn't excite me one bit. But if you take these 6 shades out of this palette, would I buy this squad anytime? I would say. Like anytime. I personally feel that Pat McGrath is known for her Blitz Astral formula. I personally do not feel anything special in her shimmer formulas. Matte, it's not that I don't like her mattes. It's just that I can find these mattes at a much lesser cost. Then why should I pay that much money? And I grabbed this for a big discount, I would say. But I still use this palette only for these 4 shadows. I don't think for that reason this is worth it. But if I have to get a neutral palette from an old time back in my collection that has those special shades and beautiful mattes, I would any day choose Dose of Colors Friendcation palette, which was in collaboration with Katie and Desi. This palette is absolutely spectacular, and it has been ages that this palette has been launched. I probably should not use this, but I any day would love to use this anytime. I would say I still dip into this palette. I know it's a shame, but I still dip into this palette every time I go to the office. I love the mattes that are included in this palette, and the shimmers are absolutely spectacular. These shimmers have definitely dulled down a lot just because it's an older palette now. But I still love it, like absolutely love it. If you would ask me today, and if I was your friend who's honestly telling you, out of these 2 palettes, which one would I recommend? I would any day recommend the Dose of Colors Friendcation palette over this palette. Like I personally feel this is worth every single penny, and this is not worth $125. So that's all that I have to say. Love the Blitz Astral formula in this, but the rest 6 eyeshadows, are not worth 125 in my opinion. Okay, now let's talk about another eyeshadow brand which I absolutely love and adore, I would say, which is Nabla. All the three palettes that I'm going to talk about last in this video is from Nabla, and this is the Secret palette, which is a bigger palette from them, and these two are their Cutie palettes, which is more of a concise color story, I would say. Now, I don't know, if you ask me, I would any day go with the smaller eyeshadow palette just because I have a lot of Nabla palettes in my collection, and I personally feel that the formula of the Cutie palettes are much better than the formulas of the bigger palettes. Now they experiment a lot in the bigger palettes. They put topper shades, they put like shimmery duochrome shades, they put like a lot. My favorite formula from Nabla is their mattes, their creamy matte formula, which absolutely dupes Natasha Denona's matte in my opinion, their bigger palette mattes. I love Nabla mattes. I dip into this palette for the pinks. I would not lie at all. I love these three on the top row. I love this shimmer shade. I love this deep matte shade. I love these three shades from the bottom row. These toppery shimmery shades, I'm not a big fan of. These satin shades, I'm not a big fan of. Would I repurchase this palette again? I would say no. For these pinks, no, I would not. But if you ask me, a cool tone palette, which is of a concise color story and it can do a plethora of look, I would definitely suggest this. And this is their Cutie Platinum palette. I absolutely love this palette. I have to glue this shade, that's why I'm holding it. It'll pop anytime out. I got this palette with that like shade unglued and I've still not glued it. Like, such a shame, I know. But I absolutely love that palette for a cool tone look, and for a berry look, I any day would dip into this palette, which is called Wild Berry from Nabla. So I would highly recommend their Cutie palettes instead of Big Pan palettes, just because I feel there is no dud that I could find from their Cutie palettes, but there is some inconsistencies from their bigger palettes. So I would say no to the bigger palettes and yes to the Cutie palettes. So that's all for today's video. I really love this style of just informing you guys which is like my color story that I'm into right now and which are the formulas that I am into right now. So if you did like this video, if you want me to do a second part to this video, leave it down in the comment section below. And if you did like this video, do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload 3 videos every single week, every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.